What happens when the cunning goblin meets the resourceful kobold? Two small but mighty creatures enter the ring and only one will emerge victorious. Welcome to Beast Brawl, Monster vs. Monster. Today we're going to be taking on Goblins vs. Kobolds. In today's episodes, we're going to be diving into the origins, lore, combat stats, and see who comes out on top. And I'll give you my final verdict for who would triumph in this showdown. And if you don't know me, I'm Alex from Slow Your Roll. Now let's talk about some angry little people. Goblins are rooted in European folklore, where they started off as just small tricksters lurking in dark places. In Dungeons & Dragons, they usually stand about 3 to 4 feet tall with pointy ears, sharp teeth, and a penchant for trouble. Historically categorized by their chaotic evil nature, but that's a lot more flexible in D&D 5e. Goblins are also known for living in tribal societies, truthfully being ruled by the biggest bully on the block. Some things you should know about goblins though: they're fast and opportunistic, usually relying on ambush tactics to take what they'd like. Like we said earlier, they do live in a tribal culture, and the goblin boss or chieftain usually intimidates to get to where they're at today. Like referenced before, their alignment is chaotic, meaning they're focusing on survival, plunder, and some short-term gains. Magaloo Bayet is their god, but I'm just gonna call him Moogly Boogly, which is the overarching god of all goblinoid creatures, demanding conquest and warfare. Moogly Boogly doesn't exactly see you as a worshipper, they see you as somebody to be subjugated. All throughout history in D&D, there have been various different types of goblins. Like for instance, one of my favorites, the blue-skinned goblins in previous editions. They have a psionic type of power. But that's not to say that other goblins haven't existed, like sea, snow, forest, and cave goblins. And just as a quick mention, one of my favorite types of goblins that I found is the Pathfinder goblin. Not for its artwork, but its amazing character traits. Pathfinder goblins are known for their hatred of dogs and horses. I could take or leave this one, but it's hilarious when they're scared of horses. Most goblins are also pyromaniacs in Pathfinder, and that's awesome, often brandishing torches or dancing around bonfires to celebrate. And my absolute favorite character trait about Pathfinder goblins, they have eccentric little rhymes and songs. They'll often sing bizarre little childlike songs about carnage and mischief. Just imagine your party walking up to a group of goblins dancing around a bonfire, and they're singing something like, "Eat the children." And while we're using goblins in a campaign, you're gonna normally see them as a low-level encounter, perfect for new players. I would even bet that almost every new player has seen a goblin. But nowadays, you might expect them to be an ally, usually a humorous or chaotic one. Boblin the Goblin kinda comes to mind. But if you were gonna use goblins, they have great story hooks to follow. Just imagine them as cunning scavengers who repurpose anything they find. If Mad Max had a fantasy world, they would be in it. Now bringing us to the strengths and weaknesses for the goblins. Their strength in numbers, coupled with the ambush tactics and agility to boot, makes them a formidable enemy, especially in the middle of a raid. They also have decent ranged attacks using short bows or thrown weapons. But the weaknesses are many. They have very low hit points as well as a low AC if they're not currently geared out. And they're not exactly an orc warrior. They're pretty cowardly when they know they're outmatched. Other really consistent depictions of goblins you'll find in things like World of Warcraft or Magic the Gathering. That's your Tinkerer Grenadier kind of goblin. But let's just be honest, they always end up being the kamikaze. But moving on to our next opponent, we've got the Kobold. Hailing from Germanic folklore, known as underground spirits. These subterranean spirits were known for gas leaks or cave-ins. If you had kobolds, it was almost like having a curse. But they were reimagined in D&D as draconic humanoids who idolize dragons. They're also about 2 to 3 feet tall, so just a little bit shorter than the goblins. Though older editions occasionally depicted them as dog-like creatures, that trend has gone the wayside over the last 20 or so years. Some things that you should know about kobolds is they are trap fanatics. You'll almost never see a kobold lair that doesn't have a trap or two in it, even if that trap's not exactly successful. And their alignment is lawful evil, almost the opposite of the goblins, their chaotic evil. But of course in 5e, that's incredibly flexible. We don't really talk about alignment anymore, it's that thing we put in the closet over there. Some kobolds are often depicted with wings and colored scales, the closer their lineage is to the dragon that they worship. Just like goblins, we have a tribal society, but the hierarchy is clearly labeled. The strongest or smartest will rise to the top, often a sorcerer or shaman. And when it comes to kobolds, loyalty comes first, because they'll usually view other races as threats or resources. There are plenty of different uses for kobolds in campaigns, mostly going to be used for underground cave encounters. Kobolds can be comedic yet formidable thanks to their trap making and group coordination. And I'm just letting you know right now, if kobolds are swarming the party, you're doing yourself a disservice by not doing that in a high-pitched accent. But if you really needed a story hook to really kick off the kobold story in your campaign, maybe they're just guarding a dragon's egg, or they're actually serving the dragon themselves. You know, adding to the horde, if you will. Now we're moving on to the strengths and weaknesses for kobolds. Kobold's strengths is very clearly going to be its trap-making ability. I might say there's no better monster at making traps than them. They have an incredibly high dexterity and intelligence when it comes to their tinkerers. They also sometimes are granted the ability to fly, and I think most DMs can tell you exactly how powerful that is. Their synergy in numbers along with their cunning strategies is one of their many strengths, but when it comes to weaknesses, they're physically weak, they have low HP, and they're very dependent on the environment they're in to be successful. You might catch kobolds in other games like Final Fantasy, RuneScape, Ultima Online, and the dog-like design often persists in other Eastern countries like China and Japan. But modern fantasy usually favors the draconic portrayals. And now that brings us to the head-to-head. In the red corner, standing about 3 to 4 feet tall, we have the Goblin. The cunning green-skinned menace known for sneak attacks and general mayhem. And in the blue corner, we have, measuring up to 2 to 3 feet tall, the draconic devotee, the Kobold. A trap maker extraordinaire, worshipper of dragons, and an absolute fiend in tunnels. Now let's go over the stats, just to show how evenly matched these two really are. Goblin with an AC of 15 with a leather armor and shield, with 7 HP and a nimble escape feature. They can disengage or hide as a bonus action, and they have a stealth modifier of +6. Equipped with both a scimitar and a short bow, with a CR rating of 1/4. And this one might be a surprise for some of you at home, but the next monster we've introduced is going to be the winged kobold. And I'll explain why in just a moment. They have an AC of 13 if lightly armored, 7 HP with pack tactics, which isn't very helpful in one-on-one. But that does give you advantage on attack rolls if you have any allies nearby. They do, however, suffer from sunlight sensitivity, which is a big no-no getting caught out in the sun. Equipped with both a dagger and a sling, but with a special ability called Drop Rock, which does just a little bit more damage on average. With a CR rating of 1/4, a typical kobold is actually a CR rating 1/8. So that's one of the reasons why we've used the winged kobold today. Under normal circumstances, an ordinary wingless kobold loses to a goblin 9 out of 10 times. But I believe a winged creature might just even the odds. So let's see what we got. Round 1, the goblin moves first. The goblin rushes forward, slashing with his rusty scimitar. He's aggressive, trying to close the gap. Our winged kobold dodges nimbly by flapping into the air. Hovering just outside of melee range, the goblin snarls in frustration. The goblin draws his short bow and fires an arrow. But the shot's wild. Goblins aren't the best marksmen, but they're okay in a pinch. The kobold drops down behind a tree or rock, using it for cover. Then quickly it darts in, looking to stab the goblin. Thanks to its mobility, it can keep it guessing. The goblin, trying to press the advantage, looks for a decisive blow, because he knows if he can land 1, maybe 2, it's over. The kobold flaps upward once again, knowing that one well-timed strike could mean the end of this. Or at the very least, force the goblin on the defensive, because both of these guys are pretty prone to running away. So the decisive factors for this is definitely going to be the kobold's wings, giving it maximum mobility for hit and run type of tactics. Goblins have brute force over kobolds, and if they can connect once, maybe even twice, the battle is theirs. In a sense, this is a battle of brute force versus evasion, and if the goblins can land a blow, the kobolds are really in trouble. If the kobold uses flight to avoid the goblin's melee ranged and pepper him with ranged attacks or hit and run tactics, it can absolutely claim victory. The fight, though, truthfully comes down to whoever gets the first 2 hits. And if the fight is in sunlight, the kobold is overpowered every single time. If kobolds do use a hit and run tactics with their sling to avoid the goblins at night, then they do have the battle tip in their favor slightly. But unfortunately, they are always in the goblin's shortbow range, even in the air. Ultimately, the goblin's hide, disengage, and stealth could be the deciding factor whether those hit and run tactics work at all. One surprise attack from a goblin, and it's all over. In my opinion, goblins win 7 out of 10 times. I got a scenario for you, and I need your help deciding the winner. It would be really short-sighted not to mention that both goblins and kobolds are, in a sense, pack animals. You're not going to see them alone, and if you do, something went wrong. And in the same sense, a 5v5 of normal kobolds and normal goblins, we basically already have the answer to that because of the 1v1. So now it's time to call in the specialists. The more avid D&D players might wonder if this is where we call upon hobgoblins and bugbears, but we're going to leave those out for now, even though they are usually leaders to goblins. But that's all the same, because if we were calling on the kobolds leader, then we'd have to fight hobgoblins and dragons, and that's not what we're doing today. I'm going to lay out 5 stereotypes for goblins and 5 stereotypes for kobolds, and I want you to decide who's going to be the winner. So first up for the goblins, we've got your standard goblin, your front line ambusher. You're also going to receive a goblin boss/warrior, a much tougher and beefier version of the goblin, who's capable of rallying the minions together. We also have the goblin tinkerer/grenadier, lobbing explosives such as improvised grenades. But when that doesn't work, they usually just blow themselves up. You're also going to receive a goblin shaman or witch, dabbling in the spell casting with minor hexes or curses. And a new one that was recently released with the Phandelver expansion, the Goblin Psi Commander. Someone who's able to use psychic attacks to disorient foes. And in the kobold corner, we've got our winged kobold, our frontliner, but a excellent scout should they need it. Next up, you're going to see the dragon priest/shaman, usually channeling their draconic power to smite enemies or buff allies. We also receive a dragon kobold shield. This is the kobold warrior. They're going to have a big beefy set of armor, and they might even have a colorful set of scales to resemble their dragon lineage. Just like the goblins, we have the kobold inventors/tinkerers, except they're not usually known for blowing themselves up. And last but not least, the kobold sorcerer, tapping into a draconic bloodline for spells, and they almost always have colored scales because of their draconic lineage. And there's 2 types of scenarios that I would consider these groups running into each other. The kobolds are out looking for food during the night, and they get ambushed by goblins. Out in an open field in the middle of an ambush? With all that, they may never be returning to their cave again. But if the goblins are brazen enough to try to ambush the kobolds on their own turf, things get interesting. Kobolds can unleash a myriad of traps, funneling foes into these kill zones, utilizing pack tactics. Goblins are going to try their best to overwhelm you with scimitars and arrows, shrieking with glee, looking to strike terror into your heart. While kobolds are going to lead you through corridors lined with pitfalls and spear traps. It truly is a battle of ambush versus strategy. So there you have it. 2 of the most iconic, small, but dangerous foes in fantasy, each with its own advantages and pitfalls. And next time for this series, if you guys really want to, we can dive into the simulated combat encounters, but that's going to take a whole lot longer and it could end up being a video on its own. So leave that down below if that's something you might want to see. Before I go, the name of this series: Beast Battle, Dungeon Duel, or Creature Clash. What sounds best to you? Hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with all the things we got coming up this year, and I'll see you all later.